Good afternoon. I had to think about it. I'm not in the United States. Good afternoon. And I am so excited. So I got to do a workshop earlier this week with some other people from the CAT team, and I had a great time doing it. Got a chance to do the keynote, I had so much fun, especially getting to bring Adam with me at the keynote, even though he wasn't here. And then I did 2 other sessions, but it was always with other people. Now I'm by myself. So I can do whatever I want to do and say whatever I want to say, right? So be careful. For you guys who've never seen me present, I literally say whatever I want to say, all right? And so we're going to have some fun today. So my name is Patrick LeBlanc. I work for Microsoft, right? I don't think the title goes with what I do, but I work for Microsoft. I work on the Power BI Customer Advisory team. And today we're going to talk about keeping your data fresh. So let's start. And so how do we keep cache data fresh in Power BI? What do you do? Refresh it, right? You refresh it every 5 minutes. That's what you do. You use the REST API to refresh it every minute, even though your data warehouse only refreshes once a night, right? Once a week, once a month, you constantly refresh it. And so if you're using the different SKUs of Power BI, there's different levels of refresh, and we know so many people that gets around these with using the REST API and stuff like that. And this is not agreeing with me. I'm not going to talk much about Power Query. The first time I delivered this session, I didn't have this slide up, and somebody said, well, you can't make your refresh faster if you don't do stuff in Power Query. I said, exactly. Don't do stuff in Power Query. Sorry. Don't do stuff in Power Query, right? Don't do it. But if you guys know Chris Webb, Chris writes tons of content about Power Query. I have to update this slide because my friend Alex Powers has 30 days of Power Query. You should go and check Alex's Power Query 30 days. And surprisingly, Marco's on this slide because his blog actually helped me do something with the customer recently. And he's like, Marco does DAX. No, Marco does a little Power Query, believe it or not. All right? And so won't talk much about Power Query, just a tiny little bit because Alex Powers made me put this in my slide deck. But so your refresh, you publish the data set out and your refresh is slow. What do? You got 18 tables, 18 queries in Power Query. How do you find out which one is slow? True story, can't make this up. On with the customer, they said, let's watch them in Power BI. In the desktop, let's click refresh. And they watch the little window. For 30 minutes, they're just watching the window. Let's see which one is the fastest. Let's see which one is the slowest. So it's like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. I got stuff to do, right? There's things to watch on TV. There's places to go. My friend Phil Seamark, I keep right-clicking when I need to left-click. My friend wrote this thing that we'll talk about a little bit, but the most common way that your data grows is how? Vertically, in your fact table. You're just constantly adding data. And so some people will say big data is 100 million rows when that's really teeny tiny data when you structure your fact table properly. Now, what we don't think about is the horizontal growth of our table, because report consumers constantly say, I need a new column in the data warehouse. I need a new column in the data warehouse. I need a new column in the data warehouse. And what do? You give it to them, and then you do a select star on every table. And then it goes from 10 columns to 200 columns. And I'm not talking about one flat table, right? We're talking about across the entire schema. Then your refresh slows down even more. And then what do? How do you make it faster? You identify the bottleneck. There's 2 guys that I work with on the CAT team. One is Phil Seamark. A lot of you guys probably know Phil from DAX.tips. Phil is a DAX genius, similar to Marco and Alberto. And then there's a new person on our team, Rui Romano, and Phil initially created this, a way to visualize your refreshes using Power BI by using a profile trace. And so he starts up a profile trace, he captures 2 events, saves it to a JSON file, and then you can use the PBIX Power BI to pull in the JSON file and visualize your refresh. It's pretty remarkable what Phil did. And then people complain, oh, I don't have Profiler. Just download Management Studio, it's free, right? Download, what's the other thing? Azure Data Studio, it's free. Download them, install it, you'll get Profiler. Rui said, I know what I can do. Rui wrote a fancy application that you can fire off, provide some parameters, and then it'll start collecting it for you. So either one. If you don't have it, it'll work. And I put links to it in the deck, and I'll upload the deck somewhere. But how do you do it? So your initial refresh was 9 minutes and 36 seconds. Fast. You're like, woohoo. All this works. I don't have to worry about anything. Leave me alone. I'm going to go off and watch some TV, right? Go watch some Netflix. Then the next day, it's 35. The next week, the next month, it's grown substantially. It's 4 times, slower. 35 minutes. How do you find what's causing the bottleneck? And that's what I like about Phil's solution that he put out. Let me show you this guy right here. So what this is, so Phil built this out. I'll zoom in. Phil built this, and it's a template. It's a PBIT file. You just provide the path to this JSON. How many of you guys have seen this? Whoa. So when your refreshes are slow, what do? I don't know, Patrick. I just let them be slow. I filter some data out. I go in Power Query and put a filter. I don't know. What do you do, right? So this thing, though, this is remarkable. So you should go and read Phil's blog. So go out to dax.tips. Come on, internet. Oh, it's my computer. This is not the internet, all right? And so you should go read Phil's blog post out at dax.tips, and he walks you through every step that you could take to do this. And like I said, Management Studio or Azure Data Studio, they're free. Download them, install them, and you'll get the profiler. And once you have the profiler open, you can go either, somebody created an external tool. I forgot who it was. I'm not good at remembering all these things. But there's an external tool for the SQL profiler. I don't know who created it. Steve Campbell created an external tool for the profiler. And you can click it, and it'll launch the profiler. You go through some steps, the steps that Phil provides, and then you just refresh. Or if you have premium per user or premium, you can connect to an XMLA endpoint using your XMLA endpoint there, and then fire your refresh off. That's probably more representative of what you want to do. So you fire your refresh off there, and then let that trace run while the refresh is running, and then save it as a JSON file, and then you can visualize your refresh using the little tool that Phil created. And so you can see right here, everything's really fast until I get to my fact table. If you hover, I'm going to zoom in on this. You can see that getting the data was 7 seconds. But then if I look at the time, the processing time that analysis services required to take all the data, do all the compression, build all the calculated columns, build all those auto date time tables that you see there, all that stuff, it took 33 minutes to do that. So how do you make it faster? So now I know the problem. What do I do? What do I do? How do I make this faster? So let me show you. Let me walk you through some of these slides. Catherine, you're leaving already. Okay. I'm just waiting for the slides. So things you can do. Stop using slow sources. And you may go, Patrick, all these are Microsoft sources. Yes, they are. Yes, they are. Don't use them. They're slow. And that's all I can tell you. That's all I got nothing else to say about it. Don't use them. Use CSV files. Use Parquet files. Use a database, right? Preferably SQL Server, but there's other lesser quality databases out there. Maybe Oracle or Snowflake or something like that. They'll work too. SQL Server is just a little more impressive, in my opinion, okay? But you could use whatever you want. I told you, I say whatever I want to say, right? And so kind of like the power hour, just Patrick's hour, right? So stop using slow sources. Stop. There's nothing I can do to make them faster. I had one customer was using SharePoint lists, hundreds of thousands of rows in the SharePoint list. He's like, the refresh is slow. You're using SharePoint lists. Let me fix it. Insert it into a SQL Server. Put it in a CSV file. Do something else. Anything besides this. But Microsoft made it. I don't care if they made it. It's still slow. Nothing I can do about that, all right? Make sure your queries are folding. I'm not going to go into all the depths of what query folding is. You can read this up here. It comes from the Microsoft Docs. But basically, that M is converted into whatever SQL type language, in our case T-SQL because I'm going to SQL Server, and it sends it back to the source. Now, you can do things in Power Query that will break it and stop it from folding back. There's a little button. If you go into the query editor and you right-click on the table, you'll see this little button that says, if that button is enabled, it's going to say View Native Query. If that button is enabled, you're folding. If that button is disabled, are you folding? Maybe. So you got to check. Just because that button is disabled, it doesn't mean you're not folding. You need to fire up whatever tracing tool or whatever it is and verify that you are, or whether you are or not folding. Okay, you got to check that out. Okay, calculated columns. I just want to poll the room and be honest. Be honest. I want you guys to be honest. How many of you guys create calculated columns in your model? Do you think you can avoid creating those? Are your refreshes fast? No, they're slow. Are your models bloated? Your memory bloated? Yeah, I'm using unnecessary memory. Have you ever heard of an iterative function? No, Patrick, I don't use iterative functions. You should use iterative functions. Or maybe you should push it back to the source. Right? Maybe you should push it back to the source. Maybe you should do it in Power Query if you don't have access to the source, because we know how DBAs are. I'm sure there's DBAs in the room. It's like, you can't have access to my database. Yes, I can, because I know more about SQL than you do, Mr. DBA. I wrote a book on it. All right? I have access to your SQL server. You got to think about the way things happen with a calculated column. If it's a native column or a pre-computed column in Power Query, when the VertiPack engine takes that data and processes it, it runs some heuristics, and it determines the best sort order for it, but it also helps it determine the best method of compression that it's going to use, okay? If it's a calculated column, it's got to wait until all of that stuff is done. And then guess what's going to happen with the compression? May not be the best. Just may not be the best, right? Definitely going to bloat out your memory. Definitely could increase processing time. I'm not saying all these things will, but it's possible. So my friend Matthew Roche, ROCHE'S MAXIM, you guys have probably heard this several times this week. Data should be transformed as far upstream as possible in the SQL server, right? And as far downstream as necessary. So this guy, we were chatting about calculated columns. He's like, I have to create a calculated column. I don't have access to the source, and I can't do it in Power Query because I need to go across 2 tables. Maybe you need to do it, right? Maybe you need to use that related function and do something like that. Don't use lookup value. Use related. It's much better, okay? Auto date time. How many of you guys use auto date time? Beautiful. This is wonderful. Adam calls me up one day and he goes, Patrick, you want to join a call? We're going to talk about data modeling. I'm like, of course. I love data modeling. I don't want to join a call with Power Query to talk about premium capacities. Sorry, Alex, stuff like that. Data modeling of DAX. That's all I want to talk about. Right? That's it. I don't want to create a pretty report. Right? We got people to do that. That's not my thing. I was like, yes, let's join this call. Let me show you what Adam and I encountered. So we get on the call, and do you guys use VertiPack Analyzer? Yeah? If you don't, go to SQLBI.com tools, download DAX Studio and VertiPack Analyzers. VertiPack Analyzer is everywhere now. It's in all the tools. So we get on the call, and we saw this. This is my calendar table. Look how many rows are in my calendar table. How does that happen? How do you get 2 million rows in your calendar table? And they had like 8 of these. Like, how do you get 2 million rows in your calendar table? So I asked. I said, how do you get 2 million rows in your calendar table? Guys go, oh, in our data warehouse, we have slowly changing dimensions. I go, okay. For the end date, for the current active row, we set the date to 12/31/9,999. It's like, who's going to be alive in 9,999? He says, and if it's the very first row, we set the first date to 1/1/1899. It's like, wow, you're covering all the dates, my friend. You're covering all the dates. All right? So look how many years. Oh, shoot. Look how many years are in this model, in that table. 8,000 years. They're predicting the future, right? There's some serious AI right there, man. There's some serious AI. But what was more impressive to me, when you scroll over, I don't know, look at the percentage. It's 25% of the entire model. 25%. So I said, do you guys have a calendar table? He said, yes, we do, Patrick. I said, let's go uncheck a box. So you guys know where we go: file, options and settings, options, under data load, uncheck auto date time. We uncheck auto date time, And all those crazy tables went away, and the model size went from like 400 megs down to 115 megs. Their refresh, and I am not kidding you, their refresh went from like 2 hours and something to like 15 minutes. I'm just talking about dating times. That's all I'm talking about. Don't use it. Don't use it if you don't need it, especially if you're going to have these extreme dates in your model. Any questions? Any questions on the? Any questions? Am I going too fast? I get excited. Am I going at a good pace? All right, great. Okay. I get excited about these things. But what you see is, so this is a small data set. It's not a lot of data. So when I use Fields tool, I want to do a quick analysis to really see if this worked. So I took a small data set in AdventureWorks. It was 29 seconds. 29 seconds. I unchecked the box, 13 seconds. I cut it by a third. It's a small data set. Imagine a rather large data set, you know, with extreme dates, multiple of these tables. It could be a significant decrease in time. So we already talked about why. I showed you that already. Moving ahead in my slides. So, which is faster? If I refresh this, flat file, star schema. More tables in the star schema, right? More tables. So I go and dimensional model my data warehouse, and I have several facts and several dimensions, no flakes, just one away. And I refresh it. Then I join. I say inner join, inner join, inner join, inner join. So I have the same number of columns in my relational model as I do in my flat file, and I refresh both. Which one is faster? Of course, that's why I have it up there, the star schema. It's pretty obvious, Patrick. It's the star schema. It's not a trick question, right? Flat table took 34 minutes, and I was processing. So the beauty of this tool that Phil has, it shows you how many rows it's processing per second. It was processing 3,800 rows per second on this flat file, okay? If you go take a peek at the star schema, 10 times as many rows per second. Why? But why? Think about those large strings on those very long tables that Power BI has to process and determine all of this statistical data to determine how I'm going to hash it, how I'm going to compress it, what am I going to do with it, how am I going to put it in memory. Think about it. But if I take those distinct values, put them in a little dimension table, that's really fast. So now I'm just processing a bunch of numbers on a fact table, and I know some of you guys have strings on your fact table. It's okay. It's okay. I understand. We all make mistakes, right? We all make mistakes. It's okay. Alberto and I were talking the other night, and he came up with something interesting. I don't think he's in here. So you know how the AdventureWorks has a sales order number on one of the fact tables? Whatever your fact, you may have the receipt number, the invoice number. What if instead of storing that number, you replace it with an integer? In the data warehouse, you don't need to see the receipt. I don't need that level. If we're looking at the receipt, that's transactional. But if you replace it with an integer, it will value encode and save so much space. Then people will complain, I really need to see that, you know, receipt number. Then you can't use my model. You should go use some transactional system. I don't know. Just a thought we had. So the refresh is still slow, though. I built your star schema, Patrick. I got rid of auto date time. My refresh is still slow. What do you do? Now what? What do I do? I mean, you ready? You guys get ready for this, because this is about to blow your mind. That's what you do. That's what you do. You use direct query. It makes everything faster. I don't need to refresh anymore. Who refreshes? Refresh is 0. Refresh is the fastest I can get it. So I never have to schedule a refresh again because I use direct query. Listen to this. I want to tell you a secret about refresh. What it does behind the scenes, I hit that slide. Refresh, direct query generates T-SQL. Generated T-SQL, you guys didn't know this, is the best written T-SQL ever. Right? If you don't believe me, take one of them, run it against your data warehouse, and look at the execution plan. Beautiful. Right? No bookmark lookups, none of that kind of stuff. Don't use direct query. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. I hope everybody got that was a joke. It's slow. Microsoft's working on it. We know it's slow, right? Everybody complains, oh, direct query is so slow. Don't use it then. Cache the data. We can't. We need real-time data. How often you refresh your data warehouse? Once a month. Why do you need real-time data? Our end users need real-time data. You only refresh once a month. That makes sense. I'm confused. Okay. You guys heard of hybrid tables. I am in love with hybrid tables. My sweet mistress, they are. Right? I love them. Back in SSAS 2012, we introduced this concept where you can have partitions of different types. I was talking to Casper about it yesterday, and he's like, I remember that. I was like, I remember that. It was there. And they took it away from us. And they took it away from us. I'm like, why? That's not fair. They can't take stuff away from us. But if you try to deploy it, it really didn't work. Really didn't work. The devs took it out because they hated it. And then I started seeing release notes. I was reading internal documentation about this feature. I'm like, we already did that a long time ago. They took it away from us. But now it's back. How many guys have used hybrid tables? If you find yourself in a position where you're thinking about using direct query, it's okay, because I'm going to show you how to use it a little more elegantly today. Okay? And if you think you're going to use direct query ever, start your entire model in direct query. Because once you go import, you can't go direct query. You have to rebuild the entire model. Everybody knew that, right? Everybody knew that. Okay? So the way hybrid tables work is you have a single table, a single fact table, and you can get partitions of that table and say, hey, I want to cache this part. I want to import this part, and I want to direct query this part. So I think the marketing is they want blazing fast performance with real-time data. Blazing fast performance, that's up to you and your data model and the DAX you write. That's not up to me and your data source at this point, right? Because we're changing the storage engine when we use direct query. We're changing that storage engine from the VertiPack to whatever source you're using. So in VertiPack, there's two storage engines, right? There's the formula engine and the storage engine, right? There's two engines inside VertiPack. And the formula engine is single-threaded. Try not to have those complex calculations go into the formula engine. The storage engine is great, but when you go direct query, you're no longer using the VertiPack storage engine. You're using SQL or, the other ones, the other databases, right? You use those. When you do this, you have an option. You can go, I want to import all this old data because I do have real-time data. I'm updating my data warehouse rather frequently, and I do need this data to be real-time. But instead of going after large volumes of data, I'm going after a smaller set of data. I'm going to show you how to configure this. We'll spend the rest of the time configuring this and setting this up, right? And so you can see I've archived some data. I'm incrementally refreshing some data, and I'm direct querying some data, all against one single query. Now, there's a limitation to this. You can only have one direct query partition. You can't have two. I don't know why. I don't know why. It makes me angry. I lose sleep over it. All right, I just send strange emails in the middle of the night to Christian Wade, why can't I have two direct query partitions? I don't know if he reads them, but I need more than one direct query partition. It's the truth, right? And I'll show you what I'm talking about in just a little bit. So let's go out to the desktop. The thing that frustrated with me most besides the one single direct query partition, they said, you got to configure incremental refresh. I'm like, to use hybrid tables, why do I need incremental refresh? I don't want to do incremental refresh. I'm going to cache this old data once and then stream my new data right now. I don't want to run a refresh anymore. He's like, well, that's how it works, Patrick. That's just how it works. I wasn't happy with that. And I figured a way around this, and we were on our live stream, and somebody asked a question. I was like, let me show you, right? So take a look at this. So what you got to do is, how many of you guys know how to configure incremental refresh? Oh, OK, let me show you. So you go into the query editor, click transform. I have a playlist on my little YouTube channel. I got a little YouTube channel out there that you guys can go check out. I have a playlist that walks you through this. So you have to create these two parameters, and they must be named range start and range end. and you specify some dates. Usually I specify a small volume of data, because if I'm using incremental refresh, I'm working with a very large volume of data, potentially billions of rows of data, right? And so you specify a small range, because when you click close and apply, those parameters are going to be applied, and it's just going to pull in just that data into your local machine. Because my machine only has 16 gigs, I had to be really careful with how much data I pulled down, right? And then you go onto the table. There must be a date on your table. You go onto this table, you click on the filter, and you choose daytime filters, and you go all the way at the bottom, and it's custom filter. Choose custom filter. It went away. Right? And something that I think they said in the documentation, I found it the hard way, is when you configure in this incremental refresh, the first option is after or equal to, and the second option is before. Not before or equal to. Both sides can't have equalities, because it could potentially produce duplicate data. So be very careful when doing that, all right? So you set that up, and you use those parameters. I think I already have it set up right here on this table. Let's see if we can open that up. So you can see right here, I have it set up, is after 2 or equal, range start, is before, range end. Do it, right? And I'm like, well, why do I need to do this? I don't want to do incremental refresh. They said you have to do it, Patrick. You want to use hybrid tables, you got to do this. So I follow the rules sometimes, right? Sometimes. Once you do that, no, not now. Not now. Go away, okay? You go onto the table where you want to configure your incremental refresh, and then this window will open. I'll zoom in and talk to you about it. If you're just using incremental refresh without hybrid tables, without the streaming feature, this will work in Pro. Once you check that box for the hybrid feature, you must have premium per user or premium. I mean, Microsoft's got to make some money somewhere, right? They got to pay me, right? And they got to pay all my travel expenses while I'm here in London. And I'm not cheap. I'm not a cheap date, all right? Not a cheap date. So we want to archive data starting 5 years ago. We want to incrementally refresh the last 5 days. And then when I check that box, get last data in real time with direct query, what do you think that means? Because I was confused as French toast. What do you think it means? What is it going to direct query? Right. If I'm confused, that's what I told him. I said, if I'm confused, and I look at this every day, imagine somebody's just getting started with this. They're going to be really confused. And I pushed back. I was like, this means nothing to me. And so they said, well, let's set up a call, Patrick. Patrick's concerned. He's a diva. I'm like, okay. Mark Ruggiero calls us, our team, pretty much our team, the cat team, the Kardashians of Power BI. That's what he calls us, right? I said, if we're the Kardashians, I'm Kim. Sorry. Anyway, so what does this mean? And then look at the first one, data imported from 3/11 to 2017. That's not true. It actually goes to the beginning of 2017. But why are they lying to us? I said, Christian, why are you guys lying to us? He said, we'll fix it, Patrick. We'll fix it. So they're working on updating this screen. So I decided I'm going to do some digging. So when you check this box, this is going to match this. So if I choose days, it's going to be real time for the current day. So today is going to be streaming. If I choose month, it's going to be the current month. If I choose quarter, it's going to be the current quarter. If I choose year, it's going to be the current year. Make sense? But why didn't you just say that? Microsoft. Right? I was curious, and I couldn't figure it out, and I said, I'm not deploying this out. I'm not refreshing this. How can I figure this out? Anybody use Tablet Editor? I do. I argued with the guy the other day. He wanted to use Visual Studio. I was like, no. Don't do it. You can't have Visual Studio and Teams running on your machine at the same time. It'll never turn on. You won't be able to do anything. They take all the resources, all the CPU, all the memory. Anyway, right? Microsoft, I probably won't have a job Monday. It's okay. It's okay. It's okay. So I used Tablet Editor 3 because Daniel is so kind to give me a key to it. And if you take a look here, Power BI automatically manages these partitions for me. And somebody said, Patrick, why do I have all those days? So it's really smart when you use incremental refresh when it's a complete period, and the complete period ends at month. So when I get to, March, it's complete, Well, March plus 5 days, 6 days, is complete. It'll roll March up. So around April the 6th, you'll see March roll up into a month. And then it'll be 5 days, well, 6 days because of my streaming day for April. So it's really smart what it's doing behind the scenes in managing this, okay? But I don't know this unless I have some tool that I can go. You can use Management Studio to look at this. You will not see this until you do a refresh of your model. So you got to go and refresh your model in Power BI. Or there's actually an option here in Tabular Editor. If you right-click on the table, I think he added it. Oh, right there. If you right-click on the table and choose Apply Refresh Policy, it'll actually create those partitions so you can see what it looks like. All right? Any questions? Yeah?
It says onward. Does that mean that,
Oh, there you go. I hope nobody would see that. I hope nobody. So it says onward. If you have future data in there, it's going to show.
But that's not the same as incremental refresh.
Not the same as incremental refresh. Not the same. So his question is, there's a partition down here. Ooh, this thing hurts. Here we go. There's a partition down here that says onward. Right there, right? It says onward. And so I was like, why does it say onward? I saw it too. I was like, why does it say onward? He's like, well, you know, we did it this way. Wonk, 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 wonk. That's all I heard after that, right? And I'm like, but if I put future data in, it's going to show that future data in my partition. He's like, yeah, but why would you have future data? Like, well, sometimes people put, you know, forecasts and things. Well, then you need to do something else. I was like, okay. I'm not going to debate with you, man. I'm not going to debate with you. But yes, it will. But what's interesting, though, if you look at the storage mode for this partition, it says direct query. And then if you look at the storage mode for all the other partitions, a little closer. What about now? Okay. Thank you, Catherine. And so if you look at the other partitions, it says import, but it's a single table. It's brilliant. I think it's brilliant. I think it's pretty brilliant. Okay? So once you go over to Power BI, let's go over to Power BI. I created my data set. I published it out. Power BI is not agreeing with me today. There we go. I created my data set and I published it out. Now, all of this is a single table. Let me get some real estate back here. Can you guys see that in the back? Or do I need to zoom in? You can see it? Okay. So all of this is a single table. Remember my policy. Archive 5 years, give me incrementally refresh 5 days, and then it's going to stream the current day, right? And so when I initially load my model, it's going to be empty. Then when I do a refresh, it'll pick up the archive and the incremental refresh data, okay? The streaming part is direct query. So it's going to send queries every time back to the source. When I do any subsequent refreshes after the initial refresh, the import one, the one with the 5 days, that's the only tables that's going to refresh, okay? So now I'm not refreshing this entire model. I'm just refreshing a very small section of the model. Does that make sense? Now, there's other things you can do inside of incremental refresh that's a little beyond the scope of what we chat about. I got a list that talks about them. Like if data does change back in 2017, 2018, there's some very elegant things you can do to just refresh those partitions as opposed to refreshing every single partition, okay? So if I go, you can see I have no data. I have no rows coming in right here. So I wrote a little script to hammer up, to beat up, what's this thing here? AdventureWorks, to expand it out. And there's a little delay in it, so I'm going to run this script here. I think this is the right one. Yeah, this is it. So we'll run this guy. So that's inserting data. So I'll go back over to Power BI. I'm a really ambitious presenter with these demos. Really ambitious, really ambitious. So we'll go to visualization pane, and we're going to turn on auto refresh. And so I have it set to every 5 seconds right now. And so what you'll see, a little spinny thing come up right here. Should. Yep, there you go. So you can see this is spinning, and we're at the mercy of the internet. But now you can see it just inserted 159 rows. And then when it refreshes again, so what is that, 199? That's still 159. Maybe it finished before maybe my script finished before I did the insert. But as data's inserting into that it meets the criteria for that partition, this will update in real time. So then I did a video on it, talked to Christian about it, and everybody's like, oh, this is great. This is the best. But what if I want to reverse it? What if I want to archive just this year and direct query every other year? How do I do that? I said, well, shoot. We don't need incremental refresh, so I can't use the desktop. You got a question? Okay. Anybody have questions? Either I'm doing really good or you guys are just not paying attention. I'm going to assume good. All right? So I said, how do I reverse it? And then when they released the blog post, they said in the blog post, oh, we're going to have these upcoming blog posts, and we're going to do this with C# in Visual Studio Code. I was like, what? I thought this was self-service. Why would I use Visual Studio Code? So I opened Tablet Editor. I opened it up, and I looked at the model that Power BI created, and there was one significant difference between the model in hybrid mode and my older models. Let me show you what it was. So if you go to Tablet Editor, so I actually published this model out to the service, and I used the XMLA endpoint to pull it in because I wanted to show you this model. And so one thing I noticed was, if you click the model here, and I was just thinking about this, this is not like DAX Studio. All right, anyway, and you expand out the database, and I'm going to zoom in to show you. When the first time I tried to do this, when you go to Tablet Editor and create a database, so if you want to do this, you got to use something like Tablet Editor. You can't use Power BI Desktop, okay? I noticed the compatibility level was 1565. So I tried to deploy mine out with 1560. I got this error. I was like, what? Why do I get this error? Why do I get this error? Spent a couple of hours, yes, just staring at these JSON BIM files and trying to figure out. And I finally said, oh, use Visual Studio Code, do a compare. And I compared it, 1560, 1565. I said, whoa. In Tablet Editor 3, that's not an option. So I said, I'm just going to type it in. So I typed it in. I said, all right, now I'm excited. And then Tablet Editor 3 has a really good import process. So I won't walk you through this wizard of importing the table. But I got my table imported. And Alex will be proud of me. I wrote a little M. Just a tiny bit of M. Okay, I didn't, Alex. I didn't. I went to Power BI Desktop, walked through those steps in Power BI Desktop, and copied the M to, I'm not lazy, I'm just efficient, right? Why would I write M? I only write DAX, and I'm not very good at that these days. All right, so I created two partitions, one for last year and one for this year. And it was really easy when you use Power BI Desktop to generate your M. Let's see, there we go. All right, can you guys in the back see that? So you see the very last line. I said, last year equals selected rows, table, date in is previous year. All right, so last year. I just want last year. So it's dynamic. So this is something very important. You need to make sure these partitions are dynamic. Or you're gonna, if you hard code it for 2021 and 2023, last year is not 2021, so you got to go touch the partitions. We don't want to touch stuff. All right, we got other stuff to go touch, not this stuff, right? And so you can see, right? That didn't sound good, but I don't care. All right, okay. So that's going to give me previous year, and I set it to whatever storage mode I want. Somewhere down here, I set it to direct query. Because I don't want to import all that stuff because people rarely access that stuff. I did something very interesting when I was designing this model. I went and talked to the people that was going to use the data set. As IT professionals, we don't do that. We don't. When they start talking, we go, shh, I got you. I know what you need. I know what you need. Then we go mess up. And then we got to talk to them. Try to figure out what they need. But I talked to them. I was like, what's the most important data of the year? It's like this year. I said, all right, I'm going to cache that. Not a lot of data. I said, what about the other stuff? We'll touch that every now and then. I said, if it's slow, it's okay. Yeah, I don't care if it's slow. Usually I let that report run and go get a coffee anyway. I said, all right, we'll make that slow. And then, guess what I did? I made another partition for just this year. See the same thing. And I set that mode to import. So now I'm only importing the current year. Never ever do I import all that craziness in the other years because nobody looks at that data anyway, but it needs to be available to them when they do stuff. It's a negotiation. with me and my report consumers, but you got to talk to them to know these things, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. And then I published it out. And then I published it. Am I out of time? Well, how many? 10 minutes. Perfect. So I published it out and refreshed it, and they used it, and they loved it, and it's great, right? So if you want to use, if you're okay with using incremental refresh, you can use the Power BI desktop. But you have to configure incremental refresh. If you want to use, if you don't want to use incremental refresh, but do some custom things like controlling what's going to be direct query, what's going to be import, you can use Tabular Editor. You can only have one direct query partition. And so I did something in Power Query for the keynote, and Alex helped me with this, and it was so simple, and I was like, oh, geez. And so I was like, give me everything that is not this year, and give me everything that's today in one Power Query. And I put and. What do you think happens when I put and in that filter? I got no data. That condition is never going to meet. So he said, oh, just put or. I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. Put or. I put or. So I had to do some trickiness because I can't have a partition for a direct query partition for this and a direct query partition for that. I just made one direct query partition that went 2 different ways, okay? And then I have my import partition. Now, the challenge, the biggest challenge that we face with this is somebody says, hey, Patrick, I'm going to start off with configure this incremental refresh in the desktop. I don't know that tabular editor thing too much. I'm like, it's not that bad. I promise. It's easier than Visual Studio. It's like, yeah, I don't know this thing, though. I say, OK. So they start off with it right here. And then they go over to tabular editor, connect to it, and they add a partition, a custom partition. And they go, Patrick, it let me do it. And it's great. It's the best thing ever. And then they refresh. What do you think happens? It blows up. Because incremental refresh manages your partitions for you. If you create a custom partition, it's going to delete it probably. I don't know what it's going to do with it. It's not going to be there anymore. So you can't do both. You can't do both, right? You will either need to use one or the other. You can't do both. And my plan was to show that in a demo, but I slept too long this morning. I didn't have time to set it up. It's the truth. It's the truth. I ain't gonna lie to you guys. It's the first night I slept. I've been here since Saturday, and this is the first night I slept all night, so I didn't try to wake up. I was like, I'm sleeping. Don't wake up. Don't wake up, right? All right. So I went through the demo already. Before you do this, do you guys have any questions, comments? Yes?
There's one online.
Yep.
Will incremental refresh and hybrid tables also be available in Power BI Report Server?
Yes, I will. It's like a, will incremental refresh and hybrid tables be available in Power BI Report Server? And the answer is no, no. Never, ever, 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 ever. Ever, ever. Sorry. I'm not being mean, but it's just no. It's not. Not a lot of investments. You know, it's keeping up with all the desktop stuff, making sure it's all there. But things like that requires the Vertipack engine, and trying to do that in Report Server can be challenging. And so if you want to have shared data sets like AS data sets and stuff, like shared data sets in Power BI, not the shared data sets in Report Server, you need to use analysis services. I'm sorry? Good question. So the question is, when I created those custom partitions, is that supported in Pro or is that Premium only? It's only supported in Premium per user or Premium, because the only way you can do that is if you have the XMLA endpoint, and the XMLA endpoint is not available when you use Pro. You can open it in Power BI Desktop. You can completely open it in Power BI Desktop, but that's not a feature that's supported when you try to write it to the desktop and publish it back. Answer your question? Okay. The question is, one of my favorite questions in the world, is there any plan to handle inserts, updates, and deletes with incremental refresh? You already can do it. So, true story, you ever watched this show called Queen's Gambit? Beautiful show. It's about an opening chess move. Walmart call. I could talk about this because we talked about it on our live stream. One of the largest retailers in the world said, hey, Patrick, We need to do this. I was obsessed. I went to sleep, and on the ceiling, there were tables. And if you watch this movie, this show, you know what I'm talking about. There were chessboards. There was tables, and I was sleeping. And then I woke up. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. Went down to the basement. I was like, what are you doing? I was like, I got to go. I figured it out. You can create a table. There's an option, detect data changes only. And you create this table that mimics your partitions. Now, you have to manage this table that mimics your partitions. And anytime you perform a delete, inserts and updates are natively supported. Deletes aren't. So you got to tell it when you delete something in that partition. And then there's a function that you would create to align that with that table, and then it'll automatically do it. There's a video I have that elaborates on it, and you should watch that video on Guy in the Cube. Okay? Any other questions? No? All right, yeah. There's a name for that. I forget the name for it. Late deriving. So the question is, so I have fact rows coming in, and I don't have the dimension rows that are there already. How do you handle those? Make sure they're there. I kid. All right, late arriving rows. In the Data Warehouse Toolkit, Ralph Kimball talks about how you manage it, and typically, right, I would do that up at the source, because I don't want those orphan rows that will break my relationships, that'll make some blanks in your slicers and things like that. And so I try to handle it upstream even before it gets to Power BI. So you have to come up with the business logic on how you want to handle them. If you want to bring them in and put like an unknown in your dimension and associate it with that unknown, but then you go.
Unflatten the table. Well, you can flatten the table, right?
You can flatten the table, right? But I would say don't let them come in or create an unknown row and associate it with the unknown row. And then when it's fixed, when you fix it in the data warehouse, you use something like incremental refresh. But you can use detect data changes, and on that row, you'd have like a last updated time. And then when you use that, when Power BI does its initial refresh, it'll grab the maximum for that. And any subsequent refresh, it'll compare them. And if it's greater, the one that's in the source system is greater than what's there, it'll refresh that partition. Does that make sense? Yep. Any other questions? All right, well, thank you guys so much. It has been a true pleasure and honor. And I want to say from the bottom of my heart, right? I have been waiting for this for 3 years. And I want to say thank you guys for taking the time to come and spend with me. Thank you.